Mr. Tim Cordon, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Always happy to talk to you.
Let's begin with a quick overview of the Radisson Group within the Middle East. Talk to us about the operational properties and the number of keys you have within this.
Yeah, sure. I think we've got 56 hotels operational in the Middle East at the moment. So that's around 12,000 rooms, something like that. And we're happy with that, but of course we're expecting to grow very quickly. So if we count the number of hotels that are not only operational but also under development, and when we say under development, we really mean these hotels are going to open. This isn't a kind of a wish list pipeline of hotels that we signed. You know, we're a private company, we're not a public company. Our share price is not affected by the size of our pipeline, so we can be very honest about those numbers. And we have another 50 or so hotels in the pipeline, so that's 100, and we think over the next 3 years to make that 100, 150 is entirely realistic, especially given the massive expansion we see in Saudi Arabia right now.
So of the 56, are the majority concentrated in UAE and Saudi Arabia? That's what and Qatar, I'm guessing, as...
Yeah, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. We have an important number of hotels in Oman as well. But absolutely the UAE and Saudi Arabia are the two key markets, as they are for everybody, I think, really, in the Middle East.
Earlier this morning, you were on a panel investing in tourism futures leaders. What were your key messages that you delivered, and also what were some of the key takeaways you walked away from the panel discussion with? Yeah,
that's a good question, because you go on a panel like that, and first of all, I was really happy to do the panel because it's a subject I'm particularly passionate about. How do we bring the right talent and attract the right talent into our fantastic business, our fantastic industry, and really showcase what our industry has to offer to young people? And it is an amazing career. It's a fun place to work, and it offers some outstanding opportunities, but it's not always understood that way. So I was really happy to be on that panel. And of course, we were talking to the students about the need to be, passionate and curious, but at the same time also a bit humble in our industry, and have a real understanding of what makes it tick. But I also asked some questions because I wanted to learn, right, as well. I'm by no means a millennial or a Gen Z, so I was keen to understand what makes those guys tick and what they're looking for. And one example I gave them is that we did a company-wide employee satisfaction survey towards the end of last year. We were super happy with the results. Incredibly high levels of engagement, benchmarks against our peers. We were in the top percentiles. So broadly, really happy, engaged and motivated workforce. Great news. But there was one question which scored consistently a bit lower than the rest, which was, how long do you expect to work for Radisson Hotel Group? And of course, people were answering, more in the 3 to 4, 5 year range. And me, as well as the rest of the leaders of our business, we were kind of scratching our heads. Well, if you're super happy and engaged and motivated in this company, why do you only want to work for us for the next 3 or 4 years? And that was explained to us, and it was confirmed today that it's more of a generational understanding of what work is. And it's nothing to do with how satisfied they may be in one organisation. It's the desire to experiment and work for different places and learn new things. And I guess that's to be commended, but it's a reality that as any employer needs to get to grips with and put strategies in place to maximise.
What, in your opinion, is key for hospitality groups to bear in mind when charting expansion plans? So, like you mentioned, you're at about 56 now. You're going to double that in the coming years. But there are also sort of, this is where you need to hit the brakes. These are the blind spots that you need to be careful of. What are those cautionary tales?
A few key ones, I suppose. Making sure that the opportunity you're looking at is the right fit for your organisation. Right. And when I say that, it covers a whole load of stuff, but what's the location? What's the style of the hotel that the developer is building? Does it really fit with the brand that you want to operate there? And who is the partner? Does the partner share your values of your organisation? Because if you're going to sign a 20 or 25 year management agreement, then it's like getting married. And you don't want to get married to someone who doesn't share the same values as you. And of course, our values are very much looking after the people, offering exceptional customer service, making every moment matter, we say. And if the partner isn't aligned with that, then it's going to be tough to do business with them in a successful way. So that's one of the key things we look for, yeah.
You've got people referring to Saudi Arabia as the new El Dorado of the Middle East, right? It has immense, in a sense, it has immense potential right across the length and breadth of that country. We've been talking to Saudi Arabia. They're looking at over 100 million visits in the not so distant future. You've got a huge domestic population that is much larger than what you'd find in the other countries here in the region. Talk to us about your plans specifically for Saudi Arabia and sort of how you're going to grow that market.
It's a historic shift, right? I mean, the biggest country in the Middle East, biggest population, as you say, which has been effectively closed for the last 50 years. So the opening up of Saudi Arabia can't be overstated in terms of the opportunities it creates for the Middle East. But globally, if you look in the world right now, where else can you expand organically in the way that you can in Saudi Arabia? Where else is opening up which has that population, that geography, that place in the world, that important strategic geographical location as well, with the resources that Saudi Arabia has? There is nothing to compare. So I guess it is an El Dorado, a gold rush to Saudi Arabia, but I think that spirit needs to be seen as more helping the country realize its own vision and its own strategy. I mean, Vision 2030 is a fantastic plan. It very clearly articulates the future of the country. And if we can play a part in that, then we're delighted to do so. As of course are all the hotel partners who share our passion and want to develop as quickly as possible in Saudi Arabia. We just hope that we offer something that's really appropriate for that country, and I think we do.
And what's going to be the sort of brand mix there? Because you've got collection properties there. You also have business centers and the Riyadh airport as well. So you've got a strong mix across different categories. What's going to be the growth potential there? Which brands will work best?
It's going to be a real mix. I mean, all of our brands obviously fit well in Saudi Arabia. We operate all of our brands today, and we've been able to expand all of them. I think where we see an opportunity is in some of the secondary cities that are being very quickly developed and established in Saudi Arabia, places that historically are actually very, very important and very famous, but perhaps aren't so well known today, like Taif, Tabuk, Abu Khail, places like that where perhaps some of our mid-scale or upscale brands would fit extremely well. Because what we offer with a brand like Radisson, for example, not Radisson Blue or Radisson Collection, but Radisson, which is a good upscale brand, is the ability to offer some real lifestyle components within an upscale product. So we can keep the price point appropriate for the level of demand for a destination like that, but still have a fantastic experience for the people who are visiting the hotel.
So let's look at the main six, the GCC countries here within the region. When it comes to brand mix, you have a collection, 2 collections in Riyadh, but none in the UAE.
That's right.
And then again, you have something like an art hotel, which is not at all in any of the 6 countries, 6 GCC countries here. What's going to be that evolving brand mix? You talk about another 50, 55 coming online in the coming years. Yeah. What's going to be that brand shift across the 6 markets coming in, spreading out?
Well, typically, Radisson Blue is our core brand. That's the one that's our upper upscale brand, and that's the one that's the largest, and I think that's also the largest in our pipeline, and rightly so, because it's best suited to most markets within the GCC countries, as you say. Radisson Collection, that's a relatively new brand. It's only been around for 6 years, so we're delighted with the expansion of Radisson Collection, considering how new it is, that we have 3 in the Middle East now, 2 of which are in Riyadh, as you said. I think there's a lot of space for that to grow, particularly here in the UAE. You already pointed that out. It's a market that can certainly take it. We're just looking for the right opportunity to do that. We've got a few things cooking. Interview me again in 6 months and probably we'll have some news for you.
Sustainability is such an important topic, but there's also, and this is another cautionary, it's a lot of greenwashing going on. Taking plastic out of the rooms, conversation we would have, say, 3 years ago. Yeah. But that conversation has to move forward. How is Radisson genuinely sort of engaging with the topic of sustainability and pushing that forward in many ways?
Well, I think we're in a somewhat fortunate position because of our deep Scandinavian roots. We were a company formed in Scandinavia in the mid-90s. And because of that, we've always had responsible business, as we call it, or sustainability, at the core of our organisation in everything that we do. We've had responsible business programs and sustainability programs since the company was since its inception. So it's not new to us. It's not a new thing we've had to adapt to. It's something we just had to develop and accelerate. So I'd point to two particular things. Firstly, to make sure we avoid greenwashing, because you're right, that's exactly the problem. We've developed, along with some really highly recognised external consultants, some very clear science-based targets to get us to net zero by 2030. And those science-based targets aren't about just how we operate the hotels, they're also about how we construct hotels, how we work with owners to make our buildings as environmentally efficient as they possibly can be. And that means, external certifications such as LEED, for example, which is our Radisson Red Hotel here in Dubai, the Silicon Oasis, is one of the first LEED Gold certified buildings in the GCC. So we are taking a leading role there, I think, with their very clearly articulated, independently verified targets to get us to net zero by 2030. We're fully committed to that. The other thing that we've done is that we were one of the founding organisations with the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, creating what we call Sustainable Hospitality Basics. That any hotel company, and there's a number of groups now supporting this, can sign up to a commitment that says, I'm going to operate my hotel at least to this basic level. Because one of the things that's not done today, there's no external regulation of how we operate a hotel along the lines of sustainability. So we felt that if we don't regulate ourselves, someone else is going to come and regulate us. And we'd rather be self-regulating, we'd rather set the rules ourselves. So we've put together those sustainable hospitality basics to say, if you're part of this program, then this is the minimum expectation. And I think that's also a really positive step forward, not just for Radisson Hotel Group, because we're way ahead of those sustainability basics, but for the entire organisation, the entire industry.
What are the biggest source markets for you, let's say for the 56 existing properties, right? Is it a lot of intra-GCC traffic that you see, or is it even a lot of foreign traffic coming in? And are you engaging in sort of making sure, because I believe South America, for example, is a huge untapped source market that is just driving in huge numbers. Are you looking outwards, or are you focusing more inwards when it comes to driving traffic to your property?
That's a real mixed bag, and of course, that's also a very dynamic situation. It's constantly shifting. If we look just a few years ago, you could Kuwait, Bahrain, and to a certain extent Qatar relied very heavily historically on business from Saudi Arabia, and even Dubai as well, and Abu Dhabi. But that Saudi Arabian business has largely dried up because that big population we referenced earlier in Saudi is now tending to stay more often in their own country, because of course they've now got more things to do in their own country. So that shift has happened, and we've had to react to that. So how do we go to more international markets? And if you look at the GCC, India is an incredibly important market. China's back. That's great news, because China is a hugely important market into the GCC. And I think those are the two things that I'd really flag, as well as historically important markets that have always been there. The UK, the US, they keep traveling, they're the most resilient, and we're very happy about that too.
What are the challenges when it comes to growth? We talk about inflation, we talk about rising airfares, it's going to sort of restrict mobility. We talk about the pandemic that has changed behavioral travel habits. Like in the case of Saudi Arabia, where you mentioned a lot of them are staying in Saudi Arabia itself. What are, realistically and honestly, what are some of the challenges and the headwinds to growth that you foresee and that you're putting contingency plans in place already to mitigate?
There are some. I don't see too many, quite honestly, right now. Sitting where we are today at ATM, which is breaking records for its attendance, with enormous pipelines of growth and exciting opportunities, it feels like there aren't any. But of course there are. What tends to be the headwinds to hospitality growth in this part of the world are things that often we can't do too much about. So there are external factors, geopolitical, seismic shifts that create imbalances in the economies of our source markets tend to be the problems that are caused, and there can be opportunities in that as well. We've got this terrible situation between Russia and Ukraine, but of course the GCC has benefited to some extent for that, because there's been an exodus of people to this part of the world as a very attractive destination. The pandemic hit us really hard, but again, in the GCC, we rebounded more quickly than some more developed markets in Europe, for example. So there was an opportunity in that as well. And I think Dubai in particular, a fantastic pandemic, awful times during the pandemic, but the rebound and the excitement created around Dubai through that period, really took advantage of it. So, you mentioned airfares. Let's just touch on that for a second. Yes, you're right, airfares have gone up, but I have some sympathy with the airlines with that. And I think the market will correct, because even now, the airlines are still gearing up and still recruiting and still redeploying their fleet post-pandemic. So right now, there isn't the scale of aircraft operating with the big airlines today than there was in 2019. So that restricts a bit the supply while the demand is incredibly high. So it's simply a question of supply and demand, and I think that will balance itself out. Right now, if I look at the price of airfares, yes, it's high. Is it impacting demand for the hotels in the Middle East? Absolutely not.
And my final question to you, and that's something that we started off regarding the new properties. Beyond that, and I'm going to invite you to take a slightly longer look, a 3 to 5 year look. Yeah. What are the plans for expansion for Radisson? And the second part of that question, are there any best practices from other global properties that you would like to bring into your properties that you look after here in the Middle East?
Well, we talk about expansion. I think I've already said that our belief and our target is that we'd have 150 hotels in the Middle East in about 3 years' time, and I think that's pretty reasonable to expect that. In terms of how quickly we're opening those hotels, we're opening in the Middle East. Our run rate is about 15 to 20 hotels per year that we open. So we're developing hotels, signing hotels, and opening hotels pretty quickly. So over the next 3 years, we should open at least 60, which is going to more than double the size of our portfolio. And over the next 3 years, if we then sign another 50, that's 150. I think that's a very achievable target for our company in the Middle East. And the second part of the question, global best practices that we can adopt here in these markets. There are many, of course. Some are extremely relevant, do today. Some are somewhat relevant, let's explore. The obvious one is the shifting nature of the labour market in the Middle East. The traditional kind of very fixed model is gradually falling away. Dubai or UAE are innovating there with different types of visas and more flexible working patterns. And I think that's something that's incredibly important for the sustainability of our industry moving forwards, because the Middle East is a seasonal market and we need to be able to flex our costs in line with the seasonality of the business. The other thing that's happened is that the cost per employee, or cost per FTE as we say, has dramatically increased, as it has globally actually, but here in the Middle East particularly, in Saudi Arabia especially. And what that's doing is making us look really carefully at the efficiency of our business, even more than we have done in the past. Bringing in perhaps more developed market practices around how we adopt technology to minimize boring back office manual tasks that aren't benefiting the guest at all, that has somehow either outsourcing that or using technology to do it for us with AI is the base expectation, I would say, of any of our partners today, that we don't have somebody sitting in a back office manually totting things up or doing audits, when we can actually use technology to do that and have that person, that very valuable resource, serving the customer instead.